Welcome to part 4 on my video series on This Space is Yours. It is an exploration on Black women in higher education, and this project was really for me just to reconcile my presence within my higher education program. I'm studying to have a master's in higher education, but during my journey here, I'm about to finish my first year, and it's been a bit difficult understanding presence and understanding confidence and fully living into what I'm supposed to be doing has been a question. So this video series, I explored what is the history of higher education and why wasn't it necessarily made for Black women to thrive. I explored what it actually looks like to work in higher education. If you haven't watched that video or any of the previous videos, please go back. I just finished an interview with Dr. Duncan, and she is a phenomenal woman, and I had a great time just getting to hear her heart and getting some very encouraging messages about being in higher education as a Black woman. So hopefully these videos have been as helpful to me as it is possibly going to be for you. I don't know. But yeah, so this is our wrap up. In this video, I want to talk about just like moving forward. There's a book and a resource that I had the honor of reading during this course that I'm doing, and it is by a woman named Brene Brown. Now, she is not a Black woman, but I will say that her words of encouragement honestly help create applicable steps for us as individuals. Now, of course, I'm Black, and this whole video series is on Black women. So I'm going to take these concepts and translate it. Now, of course, you can't use every single thing word for word. You have to adopt it to your narrative, but it's very helpful. So let's get started. Welcome to part 4. So these are a few steps that you can do if you are going into a context where you know that you're going to be the minority, or you know that you can't do it alone. And I feel like all of us should have this, but specifically for Black women in higher education, because there is such a low representation of us. These are some things that I have, researched and studied from other people that have been seen as useful for them. So one thing to do, whenever you go into a new context, make sure you know the history of that place. Look at their diversity missions. Look at what they stand for as a company and see if that is something that is actually being lived out. So you can talk to previous employees, look up reviews, look up videos. That's what I do. Any organization that I choose to go into or try to give my time to, I do the research on what it is, right? Another thing is you can look up affinity groups. So for Black women in higher education, there's a Facebook group. Imagine, there's Facebook groups for everything, but just look at things like that. Use Instagram, use Twitter, use whatever you can to find, even if you don't have people that are within reach of you, like within a 10-mile radius or whatever it is, there are people around the world who may be going through similar experiences with you that you can connect to and with, okay? Okay, so Dare to Lead is a book that was made by Brene Brown, and I think it's really funny how I'm ending a video series on Black women in higher education with using a white author. But when I say the concepts that she has in her book can translate through any context that you choose to work in. So as an individual, whether you are going through a career change at the age of 68 or something like that, or if you're just entering into the workforce, this can be for you. So one important concept that Mrs. Brown really tried to illustrate is the idea of having courage. And starting off, you can't have courage without being vulnerable. So whatever context that you choose to be into, be honest about where you are. Be honest with your feelings, with your doubts, with your hesitations. Be honest with those things. Now, let me bring it back though. In the context of Black women in higher education, through the research that I've done, many Black women have issues with this because sometimes because of societal pressures, the narrative of the angry Black woman, it is harder. It is essentially harder for Black women to be able to communicate a distaste or disliking or communicate feelings that are anything other than happy without it being misconstrued as being something negative. So although it is important to be vulnerable, you also have to use discernment with wherever you're going into, whatever field it is, whatever job it is, whichever relationships you're going into. You have to be vulnerable, but also use discernment. Now, another idea from Daring Leadership is the idea of living into your values. So if you all watched the previous video with Dr. Duncan, she talked about, whenever she was giving advice for anyone in higher education that's Black, she said, you have to know your why. Now that translates for anyone. Understand why you are choosing to pursue this. Understand what your motivation is. Understand what your values are, because without having values or boundaries, you're going to get ran over. There's going to be burnout. There's going to be a lot of people quitting. I mean, look at COVID-19 in general. I think that, oh gosh, I did research, but it was for a completely different project, but just the idea of mental health being advocated for now more than it ever has in the past. That shows something. It's important. So understand your why, understand your motivations, understand your boundaries and your limitations, and you gotta know when to go, okay? Now, of course, these are just general concepts, but I wanted to include some of her text in there because I was able to study it for my course, and I think that it's important to know. Now, another thing, one of the last points that she brought up in her book is the idea of learning to rise. Learning to rise is anything that has to do with resilience. And a few videos ago, I talked about having a psychological capacity of having resilience. And that is the ability to bounce back, right? That's like the general definition. And as Black women, we know how to rise, okay? Society will bring us down. One of the most disrespected people in this entire world is a Black woman. Yet we carry the burden of the world on our backs. Now, for anyone who may feel overwhelmed, stressed, unappreciated, please know that you have to be able to rise. Now, of course, if you feel oppressed and it's just a negative environment, especially when it pertains to work, get up out of there. Use discernment. Know what you need to do to pay your bills, but get up out of there. The company will move on. So I hope that this video series was helpful to you. It was very helpful to me. And I want to finish off with this idea of learning to rise with the beautiful words of an amazing poet named Maya Angelou. Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides. Just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from the past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Maya Angelou. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope that these videos could be helpful to you as they've been very helpful to me. To anyone that's pursuing higher education, specifically as a minority, specifically as a Black woman, stay there. We need you. To anyone struggling with purpose, to anyone struggling with placement, with anyone having doubts of your worth, you are more than worthy. Go into the field where you are not only valued, but appreciated, and that your gifts are being used to the fullest of their capacities. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.